Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the life divine with our beloved Ranga. We're in the chapter, The Philosophy of Rebirth, beginning on page 778, But What If?
So, Sri Aurobindo is not imposing any of his ideas on us. He's looking at the picture. He says, first of all, what do we see? We see that something is born and someone dies. But what is there before life and after death? Nobody knows. So, the materialistic theory was that it is this, a body is being produced and it dies. There is nothing behind supporting that one. So, then he refers back to the old Christian theory that there is a soul that is breathed into the body. Could that be possible? Then he examines that possibility and says that it's a little illogical, that something which is born in time becomes eternal in time. This is very difficult to accept, and we make a hypothesis, we make a theorem that that which is born in time has to necessarily die in time. That which is beginningless will be endless. And we will throw the burden of disproof on the challenger. So I won't prove it, but you disprove me. That's the argument. Then he says that there are other theories also, but we have to just take it this way, that there is only one life. And even in the Christian theory, where there is a soul that comes in, there is only one life. There are two questions here. One is the question of the immortality of the soul, if at all there is a soul. So there are so many different things he is examining. First of all, is there a soul? Secondly, what is the nature of that soul? Is it immortal or is it mortal? With the death of the body, that soul also dies. So these one by one he has been examining. Then he now comes to the theory of Bergson. Several theories he has discussed, Buddhism and Mayavada and all. And in that theory, just when a body is born, there is a subtle entity which is also created. There is nothing spiritual about it. It is just like, let us say, smoke. Okay? Smoke is very subtle. So something even subtler than smoke, which is conscious, could enter into a body. So that's what he's saying, that could be. But then the question arises, will it survive after death? So these are the questions he is going on examining one by one. Now he says that it looks like there is no survival after death. But what if we discover that there is survival after death? That's what he's going to discuss now. Okay, so but what if it were found that the increase of our knowledge, as certain researches and discoveries seem to presage, that the dependence of the mental being or the psychic entity in us on the body is not so complete as we at first naturally conclude it to be from the study of the data of physical existence and the physical universe alone. Okay, so in fact this was written 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, 110 or even 115 years ago, and that time there was just a little bit of research being done, and there were cases, rare cases of reincarnation, were discovered. But today there are 2,000 such cases, reincarnation cases on the internet. Anyone, you just go internet and rebirth and type, you will get any number of cases. So this is somebody saying, he wrote that time ago. So they're saying, research is showing that survival of some entity after the death of the body is there. Okay, let us suppose that. Okay, what if it were found that the human personality survives the death of the body and moves between other planes and this material universe? So there are other planes, subtler planes, and suppose the personality that is come into the body after the death of the body, that personality cannot remain in the physical world, but it goes into subtler worlds. Let's consider that. That's what he's saying. Okay. The material. The prevalent modern idea of a temporary conscious existence would then have to broaden itself and admit a life that has a wider range than the physical universe, and admit to a personal individuality not dependent on the material body. So, we have to then say, if there is survival, the Bergson theory, the theory of the Ella Vital, spoke of a subtle entity entering into a body which dies along with the body. But now we are finding that this personality is surviving the death of the body. So then where does it go? Obviously it's not in the physical world, so it must be in subtler worlds. So that's what he's saying. Okay, so then you have to increase your, widen your theory. The prevalent modern idea of a temporary conscious existence would then have to broaden itself and admit a life that has a wider range than the physical universe, and admit to a personal individuality not dependent on the material body. It might have practically to re-adopt the ancient idea of a subtle form or body inhabited by a psychic entity. Now when Srinath uses the word psychic entity, he is not meaning psychic in his sense. He is talking about a psychological entity. Very clearly here he is talking about a psychological entity. Okay, so a psychic or soul entity carrying with it the mental consciousness, or if there were no such original soul, then the evolved and persistent mental individual would continue after death in this subtle persistent form, which must have been either created for it before birth, or by the birth itself, or during life. So he is saying, if there is such an entity, subtle entity, I am using the word subtle entity, which enters into the body and survives after the death of the body, when did it enter the body? He is discussing. So could it be that it is already existing before the body was born, or was it born along with the body, or did it enter the body after the birth of the body?
What do the theosophists say? Theosophists, what do they say?
I think theosophy admits rebirth, I am not sure. But I think they do admit rebirth. He is discussing all the theories before he comes to the rebirth, okay, the reincarnation. So, in fact, theosophy, yes, they do admit reincarnation. Before birth or by the birth itself or during life. For either a psychic entity pre-exists, in other words, in a subtle form and comes from there with it to its brief earthly sojourn, or the soul develops here in the material world itself, and with it a psychic body is developed in the course of nature and persists after death, in other words, or by an incarnation, reincarnation here. Now, there is a very interesting thing. Let's leave aside the discussion, but when does a spiritual soul, when does it enter the body? That's an interesting question. Sometimes it can be, in a very developed case, it is the soul itself which prepares the body. I am going to enter into that body. Like in mother's case, she actually prepared the body. Her consciousness prepared the body in her mother's womb. So it is already predestined it will enter here. Or sometimes, in normal cases, the soul enters at the time of conception, or it can enter after the birth of the body also. Sometimes no soul may occupy a body after birth. So there can be people with only a body-mind life but no soul. That's also possible. But when I speak of soul, it's a psychic entity which, there are people who don't have a psychic. Okay, so all these three possibilities are there. Okay, but Sri Aurobindo is not talking of the soul. He is talking of a psychological entity which enters the body. Okay, so a psychic or soul entity carrying with it the mental consciousness. So there is a mental consciousness and a life consciousness. Or if there be no such original soul, there you are, then the evolved and persistent mental individual. The entity is a psychological mental individual would continue after death in this subtle persistent form, which must have been either created for it before this birth or by the birth itself or during life. For either a psychic entity pre-exists in other worlds in a subtle form and comes from there with it to its brief earthly sojourn, or the soul develops here in the material world itself, and with it a psychic body is developed and in the course of nature and persists after death in other worlds or by reincarnation here. So Sri Aurobindo is saying so many possibilities. So one possibility he is talking of is that the body is prepared and a mental and vital being is also prepared, nothing, not psychological, not spiritual, but just a subtle, vital and mental body, it enters into the body. But because it is coming from subtler worlds, after death of body, it goes back into the subtle worlds. That's what he's saying. So, these would then be the two alternatives. So, what are the alternatives? We'll see. He's talking of. But I'm reading the summary. But what if human knowledge goes beyond materialism and discovers that a mental or psychological entity exists independent of the physical body and exists before birth and after death? Two possibilities present themselves to us. A psychic being means psychological being, exists before birth of body and enters it at birth. This is one possibility. Second possibility, during the earthly life, a mental or psychic entity is developed and persists even after physical death. So, in fact, we do know that subtle beings can enter into a body. These are called cases of possession. So, he is not talking of that, but he is talking of a psychological entity which enters into a body during the life of the body. Okay, these are the two possibilities. One, the psychological entity exists before the birth of the body. The other is, it is created in the physical world, life and mind, it is created there and enters during the life of the body after birth. Okay, so these are the two possibilities. Now he is looking further. An evolving universal life may have developed on earth the growing personality that has now become ourselves before it entered a human body at all. So, along with our theory that life is the real thing and it is that which is creating all these beings, that it would have to, he is discussing that possibility. An evolving universal life may have developed on earth the growing personality that has now become ourselves before it entered a human body at all. So, here is a non-spiritual, subtle entity which is entering the body. Okay, so and this non-spiritual entity could be a vital and a mental entity. In fact, that's what happens with animals. There is only a vital entity which enters in, and after the death of the animal body, the vital entity escapes and enters into other bodies. Okay, so here I might as well mention something interesting because it does happen in that way. Depending on the amount of development in the animal or in man, after death, that entity will go only up to that level, up to the level of whatever it is developed. So suppose it's an animal, okay, it has got only a life, a vital being. So after the death of the animal body, that vital entity cannot go beyond the vital world. It will not be able to enter a mental world. Now take a human being. A human being with a mind, but with a very undeveloped mind, after the death of the body, this human being will go beyond the vital perhaps, but in the lower levels of mental, nothing beyond that. Now suppose you are a very intellectual person, okay, then you will go right up to the mental world. That entity will go right up to the mental world after the death of the body and take birth again. But if the soul has developed, the psychic entity, as Vatsudeva says, the psychic being, if that is there, the soul will enter into other subtler worlds beyond the mind. It will go into the psychic world, ruminate and review its life and decide to take birth again. Normally, the time span on earth is about 2 years. It's very approximate. There is nothing fixed about it. So this is the case of people who remember their past lives. This is the case of those who are going only up to the vital world and lower mental world, then taking birth again, they remember. Because the vital being has not dissolved itself. So the memory remains, the vital memory, and they remember their past life. So most of these cases where you remember your past life, most of the ordinary cases, are beings which have gone very shallow, very low levels of subtle worlds and come back again.
But what about those who are
Highly developed.
highly developed?
That's a different thing. It's a psychic being that remembers. It's not the vital that remembers or the mental that remembers.
Okay.
It's a psychic that remembers. Okay? And also another thing, a spiritual person will remember all his past lives. But a person who remembers only his past life, he will not remember his past lives. He will remember only his past life. So many interesting cases are there like that. Okay, so entered a human body at all. The soul in us may have evolved in the lower life shapes before man was created. There you are. So Swami is saying very clearly, the soul or the psychic entity, the psychological entity, he is calling it a soul, okay, may have evolved in lower life shapes. In other words, even microbes, little rats, okay, and things like that, they have only, the vital has developed in them. And after the death of the animal body, it migrates into another animal body.
Does it evolve?
They do evolve slowly.
Slowly.
They do evolve.
Yeah.
Okay. But Srimad is not discussing the evolution. He is only discussing the existence or the non-existence of a subtle being which enters into a body. Okay, so before man was created, he is talking of the life element even in the lowest life forms. Okay, so in that case, our personality has previously inhabited animal forms, and the subtle body would be a plastic formation carried from birth to birth, but adopting itself to whatever physical shape the soul inhabits. So the physical body is determining the progress or the condition of the psychic entity or the soul entity. He is still not speaking of the spiritual soul. He is speaking only of this. The animal, for instance, there is a soul, but the soul is undeveloped. It's not a psychic being yet. Okay, so or the evolving life may be able to build a personality capable of survival, but only in the human form when that is created. So now you have a being, the evolving life may be able to build a personality capable of survival, but only in the human form. In other words, this life which is created, life force, universal life force which has created this entity, dies normally along with the body. But he is now discussing, suppose it does not die with the death of the body. So that is possible, he says, but in a human body, it is in a human being, this subtle entity is capable of surviving in subtler worlds after death of the body. He is going step by step. He is still not talking of the divine soul. Okay, so, but only in human body. This would happen by the force of a sudden growth of mental consciousness, and at the same time a sheath of subtle mind substance might develop and help to individualize this mental consciousness, and would then function
would then function as an inner body.
And then function as an inner body, just as a gross physical form by its organization at once individualizes and houses the animal mind and life. So now he is talking of a mental body. He has spoken about a vital entity which is a vital body. Then there is a mental body also. In the case of human beings, a mental body also can be created by the evolutionary forces in the physical world. Nothing spiritual yet. Okay, so on the former, where is it gone? Yeah. This would happen by the force of a sudden growth of mental consciousness, and at the same time a sheath of subtle mind substance. Now look at that very carefully. There is a physical substance, there is a vital substance, and there is a mental substance. So this mental substance forms itself into a mental entity. It is still not yet, he is not speaking of a spiritual being. Okay, it's possible. In fact, thoughts are, we know that thoughts are formed mental substance, and it can survive after death of body. In Indian philosophy, we have this thing, they explain it this way. Suppose I am thinking of a mountain. Actually, my mind substance has taken the form of a mountain. The mind substance has taken the form of a mountain. That is the thought. Okay? So constantly this mental substance is going on taking forms. Those are our thoughts. And so if you want to go beyond the mental world, your mental substance has to stop making forms. That's a silent mind. Then the soul can go beyond that. So very interesting what he is going, so much detail he is going into. Okay, so this would happen by force of a sudden individual houses the animal. On the former supposition, we must admit that the animal too survives the dissolution of the physical body and has some kind of soul formation which after death occupies other animal forms on earth and finally a human body. So Srimad is saying, that he is still discussing the life plane and the mind plane, creating a subtle entity which enters into the animal body and survives after the animal death. It goes back into the subtle world. Okay, so on the former supposition, we must admit that the animal too survives the dissolution of the physical body and has some kind of soul formation which after death occupies other animal forms on earth and finally a human body. So now he is talking of a evolution of this entity. It can enter into a human body also. Now, for there is little likelihood that the animal soul passes beyond earth and enters other planes of life than the physical and constantly returns here until it is ready for the human incarnation. So Swami is saying the animal soul cannot go higher than that because its substance is limited. It is only vital. It cannot go into a mental world. Okay. So it will only go into another animal form. In fact, this is very interesting what he is saying, if you know these things. Suppose I have very strong vital desires, okay, a human being. suppose I have very strong vital desires, they take, the vital substance takes that form. And this, after death, this can survive. My desire can survive after the death of my body. And it will try to enter into other bodies to satisfy itself. Or it can enter even into an animal form. So, note very interestingly that this psychic entity which enters into a body can be a vital formation, it can be a mental formation, or it can be a spiritual formation. So, he is still discussing the lower forms. Okay, so very interesting. For there is little likelihood that the animal soul passes beyond earth and enters other planes of life than the physical, and constantly returns here until it is ready for the human incarnation. So, repeatedly the vital being comes into the animal body, develops with each life slowly and gets ready for incarnation in man. Okay, so on the second supposition is that the soul is ready before the birth of the body. On the second supposition, the power thus to survive the death of the physical body in other states of existence would only arrive with the human stage of the evolution. So now we have a psychic entity which is existing before the body is born. That happens only in human beings, he says. Okay? In the animals it is not, it is only the vital being that enters again into another body. Then in that case, but a persistent, here we are. If indeed the soul is not such a constructed personality evolved by life, see and understand what he is saying. The soul is not such a constructed personality evolved by life. The life itself is creating a vital entity. If it is not like that, okay? The soul is not such a constructed, but a persistent, unevolving reality with a terrestrial life and body as its necessary field. The theory of rebirth in the sense of Pythagorean transmigration would have to be admitted. So now he is saying that if there is a soul which is entering, then you, after death of the body, it can go into other forms, even animal forms. The Pythagoras was the one who had this reincarnation theory. A human soul can enter into animal body also. At that early times that was the theory. It can migrate. But the mistake was that it's not the soul that is migrating into, but a vital being which is migrating into other bodies.
What about the Aboriginal people?
Yeah, so they are very undeveloped. So they would be in the first stage that Swami is describing. So their soul, you can call it a soul with inverted commas, will enter into a human body after the death of the previous body. But nothing more than that. But if they are developed and intelligent, then that soul can go up to the mental level and take birth again in a human body. Okay. But if it is a persistent, evolving entity capable of passing beyond the terrestrial stage, then the Indian idea of a passage to other worlds and a return to terrestrial birth would become possible and highly probable. Swami is still exploring all the fields and saying, this is possible, that is possible, this is possible. So if the soul, which is not created by life and mind, but is created before, then it's possible that, what he's saying, it could be that it is highly probable that it returns to the terrestrial. It will keep on coming back, and not just go and come back, but it goes into higher fields, higher worlds, subtler worlds, and comes back into your body. Then rebirth is possible. But now he is saying, maybe rebirth may not be possible also. He is going to discuss that. Okay, so. But it would not be inevitable. There you are. The rebirth is not inevitable. It can decide to remain in the subtler fields. Just like many vital beings are there, which don't take rebirth at all. They just exist in the vital worlds. There are mental beings which exist in the mental worlds. There is no rebirth for them. They can if they want, but they don't. Not necessary. That's what he's saying. It's not inevitable. For it might be supposed that the human personality, once capable of attaining to other planes, need not return from them. That's what exactly it happens. The Buddhist people, they say that you don't need to come back to birth again. You can just disappear into the infinite. Or a realized soul can decide to live permanently on the subtler planes of existence. Janaloka, Tapoloka, Anandaloka, Brahmaloka, these are all the worlds, subtle worlds, and a soul which has escaped from life here can decide to remain there forever. There is a very interesting book, okay, The Laws of the Subtle Worlds. It's a very interesting book which is written by a Parsi lady. She had 2 sons. I've just finished reading that book. She had 2 sons, and in a car accident they died. Okay? And then somehow or another she was feeling very miserable now that she wanted to have contact with the idea that they are existing in non-physical bodies is there. So she wanted to contact, and she found a person who was a medium who could do the connection between the two. Okay? And then she went to this medium, and the medium would contact the 2 sons, and they would give messages to her, and the mother would listen and note down. Okay? And the whole book is there. It's very authentic. All the things, the laws of the physical worlds, they are explaining to their mother. They have not taken birth again. They are still there only. So that is very possible. Okay? So there he is saying, but it would not be inevitable, for it might be supposed that the human personality, once capable of attaining to other planes, need not return from them. It would naturally, in the absence of some greater compelling reason, pursue its existence upon the higher plane to which it had arisen. So, the human soul which has gone up, unless there is a very compelling reason, no, I want to go back into the physical world, it can remain there. That's what he's saying. Disembodied beings do remain. Okay. We know in many cases that souls which are very disturbed, okay, particularly suicide cases, they don't take birth again. They remain in the vital world and suffer. Or it could be a mental being which goes in the mental world and does not want to take birth again. So that is possible. Okay. And the higher planes which it would have finished with the terrestrial life evolution in some cases. Only if faced with an actual evidence of a return to earth would a larger supposition be compulsory and the admission of a repeated rebirth in human forms become inevitable. So if you can get evidence that there is a return to the physical life, then the possibility of rebirth, repeated rebirth is, you can now depend on that. But you have to have evidence. That's what Swami is saying. So I read the summary of what he is saying here. I warned you, this is quite difficult the way he has explained here. Okay, so an impersonal universal life force. Okay. Now you have to understand what he is saying. This we have discussed it. An impersonal universal life force evolving from matter, life, rudimentary mental. Okay, it's a life itself which is creating vital beings. It enters into body. So it can create also mental beings. May have evolved here on earth a growing individual personality before finally entering a human body. This evolving personality would have occupied a series of greater and more complex animal bodies, microbes, insects, small animals, larger animals, before it became fit for entering into a human body. In that case, this personality would be encased in a subtle body which enters into and adapts itself to the animal body form. the universal life force creating a series of increasingly more evolved and complex bodies could have created a personality that could survive even after death. This could happen with the development of a strong mental element in the personality. We would then have a mentalized body with a strong mental subtle sheath in which it could survive physical death. This would be possible only with man, the mental being. So, the mental being can survive after death, very clearly he is saying that. And we know that because these thoughts, formations, they don't evolve. They try to seek and enter other minds to manifest themselves. This is a known fact. Okay, so we must note that the animal personality could not go beyond the physical vital level after death and before it enters another animal body. So it goes only up to the vital world and takes birth again. But man, the mental personality, could survive death and spend some time in higher, subtler planes of existence before entering another human body. But if the soul is a life constructed personality with evolution and growth, then we would have to admit the Pythagorean transmigration theory, where even man can migrate into an animal body. But if the personality is an evolving entity and capable of entering into other subtler and higher planes, then the Indian idea of rebirth would be the most probable. But even here, rebirth might not be absolutely necessary. It could be possible for the evolved soul to remain in the higher planes to continue its existence there. Only if there is strong evidence of a return to earth would reincarnation be inevitable. Now, he is discussing the developing vitalistic theory. That means the life itself is creating a subtle entity. Okay. But even then, the developing vitalistic theory need not spiritualize itself. There you are. Okay. The vital being or the mental being need not be spiritual at all. It is just at this level and that level. Nothing spiritual about it. Need not spiritualize itself, need not admit the real existence of a soul or its immortality or eternity. There you are. Now he is talking of a human soul or a spiritual soul, which it need not be. A vital being is not spiritual. The mental being is not spiritual. It can enter into the body again, but it's not spiritual. Okay, so it might regard the personality still as a phenomenal creation of the universal life by the interaction of life consciousness and physical form and force, but with wider, more variable and subtler action of both upon each other and another history than it had at first seen to be possible. It might even arrive at a sort of vitalistic Buddhism, admitting karma, but admitting it only as the action of a universal life force. It would admit as one of its results the continuity of the stream of personality in rebirth by mental association, but might deny any real self for the individual or any eternal being other than this ever active vital becoming. Okay, so in other words, this vital entity which is entering and evolving, when it comes into the physical world, remember that even science is telling you that there is rigid laws that operate in the physical world. So rigid that I can tell you tomorrow at what time the sun is going to rise. Absolutely fixed. So the soul has to submit itself to this law, and that is karma. Okay, so that's what he is saying. Okay, so vitalistic Buddhism admitting karma, but admitting it only as the action of a universal life force, not a spiritual, action of a universal life force, only a vital entity. It would admit as one of its results the continuity of the stream of personality in rebirth by mental association, but might deny any real self for the individual or any eternal being other than this ever active vital becoming. On the other hand, it might, obeying a turn of thought which is now beginning to gain a little in strength, admit a universal self or cosmic spirit as a primal reality and life as its power or agent, and so arrive at a form of spiritualized vital monism. So now it could be that the center that is coming, it is universal and it could be spiritual. Okay, so in this theory too, a law of rebirth would be possible, but not inevitable. It might be a phenomenal fact, an actual law of life, but it would not be a logical result of the theory of being and its inevitable consequence. So even there, the theory of rebirth means continuously coming back into the physical body for development. So that is not yet proved, he is saying. Okay, you have to have evidence of that. So I read the summary of what he is saying here. So, even if we admit the development of an individual personality, which is not spiritual, as a result of worldly evolution, it is not obligatory for us to grant a spiritual status, a real, immortal, eternal, divine status. Not necessary. The so-called soul could be vital or it could be mental, but not spiritual. Okay. It is possible to go even so far as to admit karma as a law of phenomenal existence, which is the linked development of personal entity by cause and effect, without admitting and assigning spiritual content to this entity. This could be called vitalistic Buddhism. But in another theory, gaining more ground in modern times, there is a universal self, not an individual self, a universal self or cosmic spirit, which is a basic fundamental reality, and life could be viewed as a creation of its power. This could be called spiritualized vital monotheism. Rebirth would be possible in this view, but it would not be an inevitable result. Slowly, step by step is going. So even the entity which is created by life, okay, it's possible, but it's very possible that a universal being is coming in, and it is not life that is creating it, it is the being that is creating the life. Okay, so I think we have got time for one more para.
Yes.
We'll do that. Now we come to the Advaita of the Mayavada. Okay, so now Vedanta, the Advaita means there is only one ultimate reality. But that also there are two theories. One is the earlier Vedic theory, which is that Advaita means everything from the superconscious to the inconscient is the divine. But in the Mayavada theory, there is a divine entity, but it's only up there, not here. All this is illusion. So these are the two. So when he talks of Advaita of the Mayavada, he is talking of the later. He calls it the later Vedanta, which was actually started by, not started but it became like that by Shankara, 8th century AD. The Mayavada theory started from there. Okay. Shankara was misinterpreted and this theory came up. Okay. So, Advaita of the Mayavada, like Buddhism, started with the already accepted belief, part of the received stock of an antique knowledge of supraphysical planes and worlds, and a commerce between them and ours, which determined a passage from earth, and through this seems to have been a less primitive discovery, a return to earth of the human personality. So, from the earliest times, Vedic times, in India at least we know that there are many, many subtle worlds. So now he is openly discussing that. Okay. So it could be that it is coming from there and going back. Okay. So this is the Mayavada theory. But the Mayavada theory, the worlds are ultimately an illusion. We will come to that. Okay. And a commerce between them and ours, which determined a passage from earth and though this seems to have been a less primitive discovery, a return to earth of the human personality. By the way, Sri Aurobindo has written many interesting poems which he has taken from the Indian lore. Urvashi is one poem where a non-human entity, okay, she is an Apsara, she takes birth and comes into, because she has interaction with a human king. So these are also the possibilities that he's talking about. Okay, so there's a constant interaction between all these non-human beings which live in the other worlds are interacting with us all the time. Isn't Mother helping us? And she is not in a human form now. So there is an interaction constantly from these vital worlds and mental worlds and spiritual worlds. From the vital worlds it can be dangerous. From the mental worlds you may benefit, you may not. But from the spiritual worlds you are bound to benefit if you are receptive enough. So that's what he is now discussing. Okay, so part of the received stock of, so and a commerce between them and ours, which determined a passage from earth, and though this seems to have been a less primitive discovery, a return to earth of the human personality. At any rate, their thought had behind it an ancient perception and even experience, or at least an age-long tradition of a before and after for the personality, which was not confined to the experience of the physical universe. For they based themselves on a view of self and world which already regarded supraphysical consciousness as the primary phenomenon and physical being as only a secondary and dependent phenomenon. It was around these data that they had to determine the nature of the eternal reality and the origin of the phenomenal becoming. The phenomenal becoming is the physical world. I am going to two words here, phenomenal. Phenomenal means an event, that is a beginning and an end, and that belongs only to the physical world, not the other worlds are not phenomenal. Okay. They are noumenal, they are not phenomenal. Phenomena exists only in the physical world. Okay. And becoming, there is a being in the higher field, there is a being, it is static. But in the physical world, everything is becoming, constant movement. So, when he speaks of phenomenal becoming, he is referring to the physical world. Therefore, they admitted the passage of the personality from this to other worlds and its return into form of life upon earth. But the rebirth thus admitted was not in the Buddhistic view a real rebirth of a real spiritual person into the forms of a material existence. So, in the Buddhistic view is different. It is the vital and mental entity which is taking birth again, not a spiritual entity. Buddhism doesn't believe in a soul. There is no soul. But there is karma. The vital entity, the mental entity has to undergo the law of karma. That's very understandable, because if you are in the physical world, you are subject to causation. Cause and effect, cause and effect. That is karma. Okay, so in the later Advaita view, the spiritual entity was there, but its apparent individuality and therefore its birth and rebirth are part of a cosmic illusion, a deceptive but effective construction of universal Maya. So now he is saying that in the later, the soul is real, but it comes here and undergoes a life and then goes back again. That soul is real. That is real. But everything that was experienced in the physical world is unreal. Okay. I read the summary of what he is saying here. The Advaita of Mayavada, the later Vedanta of Shankara, like Buddhism, started with ideas of supraphysical planes and their interaction with the physical world. They believed that the personality after death went to these subtler worlds and returned thence to earthly life. It was a received concept from ancient tradition. Advaita, Mayavada, believed in the reality of a supraphysical and a secondary or dependent reality of the physical phenomenal world. Thus they believed in the personality going to the supraphysical worlds after death and returning to earthly life before birth. But the rebirth was not that of a real personality, but only of an illusion of Maya. So, one must have a lot of knowledge to understand what he's saying. But as I told you, I think we have to stop here, huh?
We could read the next one.
Okay. So, I gave you the reference of the other 200 pages in volume 13.
Yes.
There it is discussed in a totally different way. Here it is very, very philosophical. There it is less philosophical, explained in more interesting, understandable language. Okay, so now we come to the Buddhistic. In Buddhistic thought, the existence of the self was denied. Okay, there is no soul. And rebirth could only mean a continuity of the ideas, sensations and actions which constituted a fictitious individual moving between different worlds, let us say between differently organized planes of idea and sensation. For, in fact, it's only the conscious entity of the flux that creates a phenomenon of self and a phenomenon of personality. In the Advaitic Mayavada, there was the admission of a Jivatman, an individual self, and even of a real self of the individual. But this concession to our normal language and ideas ends by being only apparent. For it turns out that there is no real and eternal individual, no I or you, and therefore there can be no real self of the individual, even no true universal self, but only a self apart from the universe, ever unborn, ever unmodified, ever unaffected by the mutations of the phenomenon. Birth, life, death, the whole mass of individual and cosmic experience become in the last resort no more than an illusion or a temporary phenomenon. Even bondage and release can only be such an illusion, a part of temporal phenomena. They amount only to the conscious continuity of the illusory experience of the ego, itself a creation of the great illusion, and the cessation of the continuity in the consciousness into the super consciousness of that which alone was, is, and ever will be, or rather which has nothing to do with time, is forever unborn, timeless, ineffable. Now, we have to understand what he is saying here. Okay, it's a little, I think we'll have to discuss this next time more in detail. In Buddhistic thought, this we will look at it more interestingly. We'll look at this next time in more detail. In Buddhistic thought, okay. One thing we can say, we can wonder if Buddhism is saying that there is no soul, how is it spiritual? You may think like that how is it spiritual? The thing is that when you are in the physical world, there is pain and suffering. Okay? But if the entity inside, somehow or other you escape from there, okay, pain stops. No pain, no suffering. So that was the solution. But if you argue with a Buddhist and say, it's there in the Life Divine, okay? If you argue with a Buddhist and say, you are saying there is no soul, so who is going out? Who is suffering? So they will answer that your logic belongs to the physical world. It's not superphysical logic. And logic belongs to the physical world, which is an illusion. So even your questions are an illusion. That will be their answer. And please, have the experience and you will see that what we are saying is true. There is loss of pain, loss of suffering. Who is that? I don't want to go into. But there is, this experience is real. This is an illusion and you escape, no more pain, no more suffering. So this is their reply.
Thank you.
But one thing I must mention also,
Right.
that it is not Buddha who discussed all this. It is later Buddhism. Okay? Because Buddha always said, I refuse to philosophize because it can be misinterpreted. He knew very well that that was so. In fact, Sri Aurobindo says that. He says, Buddha and Buddhism are quite different. They are not the same thing. Okay. So we do this next time.
Namaste all. Wonderful evening. We'll see you again on Monday.